everyone, my name is Willow, and this is my review of Insomnia by Stephen King. First of all, yes, I am wearing the same shirt because I'm filming these videos back to back. So I've finally started back on my Dark Tower read-through, and the first book back was Insomnia. As I said in my January TBR video, I didn't know much about this one going in. I just knew it was on the list, and I knew it was very tied into the Dark Tower. So I was really interested to get to this one on the list. This was the next one on the list, like right after my break, and actually when I took that break, I don't think I had a copy of this yet. And then there was a library sale, and there it was. So I lucked out there. And, you know, I actually added quite a few Stephen King books because I picked up some that I was missing. I just finished this book last night, so the story is still fairly fresh. Normally it takes me like a day or two to actually shoot the video after reading the book, so some of it's kind of departed my mind. And also, for being almost 800 pages, I feel like I flew through this book. It was one I really didn't want to put down. Like, I actually did schedule extra reading time for myself above what I normally do because I wanted to get to the next part of the story and see what was going to happen next, because just the way that King paces this one and the way that the chapters are broken down, it makes what is, fairly epic length run by fairly quickly, and that was great. I loved that. And like I said, I feel like I flew through the book, and I really enjoyed it. Basically, we return to the town of Derry, which if you've read It or seen the movies, that's where It used to be. That was its domain. That was where Pennywise, got all his victims. It takes place in 92, 93. So you're 7-8 years after the final events in It. Mike Hanlon makes an appearance. Ben Hanscom is mentioned. And you get all these little nuggets of Derry that you got to know in It. And seeing them outside of the lens of the It story. So while we focus so much on those characters of the Losers Club in It, you get a whole different side of Derry in this. And just having a character that grew up in and around Derry all his life, who wasn't aware of those events but knew that there was something off about the town, but not understanding why until he gets wrapped up in his own series of events in Insomnia. Basically, the way this whole thing starts is Ralph Roberts, the main character, has a run-in with this guy in town named Ed. I'm going to butcher this last name. It's Deepneo. No, now, I don't know. Deepneau. Yes. Ed, who has always been kind of a, normal guy, on this one particular day in 92, Ralph sees him literally losing his mind and going after this gardener, trying to claim that the gardener is secretly stowing away stolen babies and wanting to just, kick his ass. And Ralph gets in the middle of it, and that kind of thrusts him into the middle of these events that are going on around him that have wider reaching effects than he could ever know, because they actually connect directly to what's going on in the Dark Tower stories. But we don't know that yet. He doesn't know that yet. Not even Ed knows that yet. And Ed and Ralph become kind of the pivotal two characters in this book that connect to those events later on. So a couple months later, Ralph has lost his wife, and he's suddenly having trouble sleeping. Eventually, this leads him to seeing what Ed referred to as the colors, and what Ralph comes to refer to as auras. And he begins to see these during his waking hours, and at first he thinks he's going crazy, but then he realizes there's something more. You get to see this slow decline into the weirdness of the Stephen King universe from the perspective of this, normal guy. never expected to be anything extraordinary, just retiree, you know, supposed to be in the prime of his life, has lost his wife, and now is just suffering these bouts of insomnia that he thinks driving him mad. Of course, it turns out there's a much bigger picture involved, and he is directly involved in those events that, basically he is called by a series of higher powers to stop Ed from doing what other higher powers, darker higher powers, have ordained him to do. So you have this struggle between good and evil on, you know, a grand scale played out on a very human level. Basically, it's two higher powers, the good and the bad, picking pawns off their chessboard and saying, okay, these two are going to have to duke it out now. And the multiverse tips on the edge of the outcome of this battle. And, you know, compared to it, like, it was such a nebulous evil. Like, you know, you got to know a little bit about the entity, but King also played it very close to the chest. And what I really like about Insomnia is he still plays it close to the chest. Like, there's a lot of stuff that you don't get to know. It's hinted at, but you don't get to know for sure. A lot of times there's no definite answers with what's going on. But there's enough hinting going on that you kind of understand, like, the forces that are at play between Ralph and Ed. And a lot of this is played out by what would be considered middlemen, which are known as the Little Bald Doctors. And the Little Bald Doctors are these kind of, they're basically what would be considered as like the Angels of Death. But much more like Working Joe, and they have just enough ability to help those that are dying pass on to the next level. And there are two sides to that, because there are two sides to, like, the forces at play, which are the purpose and the random. And what I like about the way Stephen King writes these is that the purpose and the random aren't necessarily good and evil. The purpose and the purposeful death are more kind, while the random and the random deaths are much more sudden and potentially painful. I like the way that King writes that dichotomy. And then you have a force such as the Crimson King. So following up from Hearts in Atlantis, we get more Crimson King, and this time we actually get the main character facing the Crimson King, which, you know, he was just talked about in Hearts in Atlantis. Well, in Low Men in Yellow Coats. But this time we actually get like a face-to-face meeting. Like, Ralph actually squares off with the Crimson King because Ralph's trying to stop Ed, and Ed's being used by the Crimson King to get what he wants in the events of the random. It gets a little complex, I'll tell you that much, but worth the read. There's something that Crimson King wants done. He has, through certain agents, picked Ed to be his representative in this deed, and the opposing forces to the Crimson King have chosen Ralph for their side. I think that's what makes this book so enjoyable, is the way that it does cross between the cosmic and the everyday, and the way that, you know, beings of a higher order can still look up to what would be considered, you know, lower life forms, such as humanity. In a lot of ways, you know, these higher beings have a great deal of respect for them because of the lives that they're forced to lead, as they're termed in the book, short-timers. We're short-timers. We exist for only a short time. Short-timers. I think that's all I want to say about Insomnia. So that is another book down for my Dark Tower read-through. My next book is Everything's Eventual, which is another collection of short stories, and there are 2 short stories that relate back to the Dark Tower, including the title story, Everything's Eventual, and The Little Sisters of Illyria, which is a Dark Tower story featuring Roland. So, the way the reading list works. Like, they took us out of the Dark Tower world, but keep on reading books that are connected somehow or another, and then we're gonna go back into Dark Tower, because after Everything's Eventual, the next book on that list is The Wind Through the Keyhole, which it came out after the bulk of the series, but it's technically book 4.5. So I will be officially back into the Dark Tower books after Everything's Eventual. And I think I have like 5 or 6 more books total, I think, something like that. You'll see it in post. The number will pop up over my shoulder, the actual number. So yeah, that's all I want to talk about today. This has been my review of Insomnia by Stephen King. As always, I hope you're all well, and I will see you next week. And the opposing forces to the Red King,